Good evening to all of you. Welcome to Beth Jacob congregation. It's really our pleasure, privilege, and honor to be hosting tonight's program, which is presented by the Shalom Hartman Institute. I want to express my appreciation on behalf of all of us to Michelle Bider-Stone, who is the leader of the Los Angeles office of Shalom Hartman of North America. And it's just an amazing program that we have for you this evening that I'm really looking forward to. And the reason why it's important, actually, I thought of the reading that we did in the synagogue this past Shabbat, which is where from the very beginnings in the Bible of the Jewish people, where God speaks to Abraham, and when God has that very first conversation with Abraham, it's not solely about family, and it's not solely about the Jewish people. But God says to Abraham, "V'nivrachu v'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama," that through you all the nations of the world, of the land, shall be blessed. And the way I interpret that statement from God to Abraham is that God wants Abraham to be involved in the world around him. God wants Abraham not just to develop a nation and a family, but to be engaged in the world and think about his neighbors and think about his relationships with his neighbors. And so I think that's why this is an incredibly important program tonight, because this program really reflects that first blessing, that first command from God to Abraham, which means to be involved in the world, to do it in an honest kind of way, and which means that you can be loyal to your convictions, but yet have space to hear the perspective of another person and to hear the narrative of another people. And so we understand the centrality of Israel and the Jewish people, but we also care about our neighbors and about their narrative as well. And so tonight we have three distinguished individuals, people I respect. David Suissa, you know well from here from Los Angeles, a leading journalist, Tribe Media, Jewish Journal. Yossi Halevi, one of the smartest journalists in Israel today. He's a longtime friend of mine. And it's such a pleasure to welcome back Yossi as well. And David, we welcome back more often, but Yossi, welcome back to our congregation. And a new friend of mine who I feel as if almost it's an old friend, but we just had dinner together. It was just a delightful human being, a wonderful person that you're going to meet, Imam Abdullah. And I think this is a historic initiative that's going to be discussed tonight, which is of the Hartman Institute, to bring together the Jewish community and the Muslim American community, and to show that we have shared bonds of humanity, to develop relationships and to foster dialogue between the two communities, and to show that, you know what, that we have a future together. We have to care about the world together. So it's an amazing program, a historic initiative. I'm looking forward to this program tonight. And it's really this lesson that God told to Abraham, which is to be involved in the world, two peoples who are descendants of Abraham, who over the course of history, to one degree or another, have had some tension between the Muslim community and the Jewish community. And here you have two individuals, leaders of their respective communities, who are building bridges, fostering relationships, hearing the narrative of the other, which is such a beautiful thing to see. And it's very, very important for our community to hear, and that's why it's proud for our community at Beth Jacob to host it. And now I turn it over. Thank you for being here. I turn it over to David.
I listen to you, you listen to me. Let's have Ramadan together. Let's have a Seder together. And it's really, they're wonderful initiatives, and I've seen a whole bunch of them. But this wasn't it. And he threw me for a loop. So it took me a while to really get it. And this is why I think tonight's a really special night, because it's really the first time in Los Angeles that we're showing this kind of an initiative, which is basically, here's the way Yossi brought it up to me. He said, I've met this amazing Muslim. He runs the divinity school at Duke. We're getting really close, and I'm thinking of taking them to Israel, taking Muslim scholars to Israel, and teaching them about how Jews understand Zionism, how Jews understand Judaism. It's sort of like a one-way initiative where American Muslim scholars would go to Israel and learn about Judaism and Zionism, and it would extend for a whole year. So all I said was, good luck. So tonight, we're going to have a conversation about this initiative. And the timing is terrific because they've been at it now for 4 years. So these are not promises. These are not projections. These are like real things that have happened. And I want to start with my friend Imam Abdullah Antepli, who I had lunch with. He came to the Jewish Journal a few months ago, and we had we have hummus in a Syrian restaurant in Koreatown, right next to the Jewish Journal. God bless America. God bless America. So tell us how this thing started. Give us the genesis.
Good evening, everybody. Assalamu alaikum, shalom aleichem. It is absolutely a pleasure and honor to be in this beautiful shul, in this beautiful community.
He said shul.
My Hebrew accent is much better than many American Jews that I know, so I can... My Arabic and my Turkish is helping. My departure point in building Muslim Leadership Initiative, as David summarized, it's a 13-month fellowship where emerging young Muslim Americans, imams, professors of Islamic studies, journalists, public intellectuals, to go and try to understand Jews as people, Judaism as religion, Zionism as a form of self-identification, and Israel as a state. My departure point was in absolute honesty. If we are going to do anything really significant and substantial in improving Jewish-Muslim relations, Rabbi spoke so beautifully, both in Islam and Judaism, both in halakha and in Islamic understanding. We are all descendants of Abraham. We are part of the Abrahamic family. But I think Hindus and Buddhists, those who are not Abrahamic, they look at us and say, boy, what a dysfunctional family. We are not doing well. We are unfortunately not doing well. Our departure point should be acknowledging and understanding that the Jewish-Muslim relations, in many parts of the world, you would be embarrassed to call it a relationship. There is no relationship. Jews and the Muslims in the Middle East, they are not locking arms and singing, or Jews and Muslims in Europe, they are not dancing Oze Shalom Bimrumav. So, if current situation is so unimpressive, if business is losing money in red ink, in the words and wisdom of Rabbi Albert Einstein, that means most of what we do today is contributing this unimpressive, somewhat depressive Jewish-Muslim relations. I hope I don't have to try really hard why we are not doing well. Jews and Muslims are a lot more polarized today than many, many years ago. Anti-Semitism is unfortunately on the rise in many parts of the Muslim world, and it's gaining increasingly religious currency and religious atmosphere. And not to that extent, but I think anti-Muslim bigotry and the kind of bias and prejudice against Islam and Muslims within the Jewish community is becoming increasingly a bigger issue. I can give many more examples if you think it's not as bad as I'm describing here. So my departure point was, that means if we keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, as Rabbi Einstein said, we are insane. Like, we have to really creatively think about a way in which how we can just stop doing most of what we do or improve the things that we have been doing and create a different paradigm. And I have identified two problems vis-a-vis my community's inability to understand and build bridges with the Jewish community. There are two Jewish-Muslim conversations happening in the United States today. Two types. And both of them are unhelpful to me, toxic. And depending on the day, I don't know which one I'm more angry with. One type of conversations are, as you said, often well-meaning, well-intentioned Jews and Muslims, they come together and deliberately and intentionally they say, we're not going to talk about Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We will not talk about politics. What will we talk about? We'll talk about hummus, kosher chicken, halal chicken, and intentionally keep everything divides us, polarizes us. All the things that give rise to anti-Muslim bigotry and anti-Semitism just as elephants in the room. and happily we sing Kumbaya and leave. Or there are another type of conversation. Jews and Muslims here in the United States, we come together with self-serving talking points. Everybody has their own history, everybody has their own self-referencing facts, and we debate. We get into shouting matches on college campuses, in some other areas. So most of what we do seeming to be, in one way or another, these two types of conversations, and it's not helping. It's not helping to us. The further polarization is becoming increasingly more alarming in many parts of the Muslim majority world. And I think at least in the United States, unlike many other parts of the world, as I believe it, if there is a verse from Sinai calling for a reconciliation between Jews and Muslims in the 21st century, American Jews and American Muslims, we have a stronger and more powerful moral obligation and responsibility to show the world, to show the rest of the world what would a 21st century Jewish-Muslim relations would look like. It is only possible in this part of the world doing something between shouting match and singing Kumbaya. And in that, I felt I will take onto my community because there are two major obstacles which keeps ending the conversations. And I will give a chance my friend Yossi to explain.
Imam, you're more Jewish than I thought. It's a nice speech. Go ahead.
Yes. Why don't you elaborate how it went? Education and trust building. With education and trust building, I believe Jews and Muslims today not only can but must bring their relationship to a level of health, to a level of sophistication, where we can actually talk about every other issue divides us, including what's going on in the Middle East.
Thank you. Thank you, brother. Yossi, this has been a long journey for you. When I first met you, we were just finishing a very spiritual book at the entrance to the Garden of Eden, and you had spent time with Muslims in the Holy Land and in Jerusalem. I'm curious how this fits into your journey, because I followed you all these years in a very close way, and I'm curious how this new chapter fits into your spiritual journey.
Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. I have to tell you what a thrill it is to be here, first of all, on the bima with two of my favorite people in the world, and to be back in the shul of one of my favorite rabbis in the world. So I'm just really, really thrilled to be here. I'm a little jet-lagged, a little depleted, but nevertheless, very happy to be here. The experience of creating our program, which is called the Muslim Leadership Initiative, MLI, actually dates to the failure of the book, the publishing failure of that book at the entrance to the Garden of Eden. The book is about a journey that I took in the late 1990s into Islam and Christianity in Israel, in the territories. And my purpose was, as a religious Jew, to try to see if Muslims, Christians, and Jews can create some kind of a shared religious language. And my purpose was not to discuss theology, but to experience something of the inner spiritual life of these two religions. And to do so, again, as a religious Jew. And the book had the misfortune of being published literally on September 11th, 2001. That was the publication date. I was in Manhattan that morning because we were planning for the launching that night. And needless to say, in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, the American public was not really interested in reading about the spiritual exploits of an eccentric Israeli Jew going into Islam and Christianity in the Holy Land. And so I learned very quickly to accept the failure of that book and to try to move on to the next project. And what I learned in the process is that sometimes a book is written for one person. And that one person was Abdullah. A few years later, after I had pretty much forgotten about the book and buried it and moved on, I get an email from this guy with his name I did not recognize. And he said, I read your book. I said, you know, you're the one. and I was deeply moved by the reverence and love that you showed in that book for Islam, for Muslim spirituality, which I really did learn to cherish. And I'd like to reciprocate your journey into Islam by taking a journey into Judaism. And Abdullah at the time was the Muslim chaplain at Wesleyan University. And he said, I'd like to bring a group of Muslim, Jewish, and Christian students, Christians too, right? To Israel, and would you meet with them? Now, the year was 2004, 2002, even more to the point of what I'm about to say, which is that it was the height of the Second Intifada. And I was in no mood for interfaith. I was as angry and Israeli as anyone at that time. And I, quite frankly, believed that we had exhausted our capacity as a nation to reach out. We had made peace offers that were then rejected in the most violent way possible. And I felt that I had exhausted my own personal ability to reach out. So Abdullah came with his group of students, and I met with them. And the message was not what Abdullah had been expecting from the person who wrote that optimistic book about Muslim-Jewish relations. And afterwards, Abdullah said, what are you doing to help heal the Muslim-Jewish wound? And I said, nothing. And he said, why not? And I said, because there's really nothing to do anymore. It's over. And Abdullah, as I have since learned, is a very patient man. And he said to me, you and I will work together on Muslim-Jewish relations. And what I said to myself basically was, good luck with that. And we kept in touch over the years. And fast forward, Abdullah shows up at the Hartman Institute. This was 12, at a theological conference that we had. We have a theological conference every year. And Abdullah came to participate, and he said to me, I see that you have a program here for Christian theologians at the Hartman Institute. Why don't you have a program for Muslims? And I said, because Muslims are not going to come to an Israeli Zionist institution. And he said, if I bring you a group of leading young, emerging Muslim American leaders from various fields, will you at the Hartman Institute teach them? And with all of the authority that was not invested in me by the Hartman Institute, I said yes, because I was certain that nothing would come of it. And a few weeks later, Abdullah sends me this list, a who's who list of leading young Muslim journalists, writers, university chaplains from Yale, Northwestern, the founder and editor of the first Muslim American women's magazine, just a stellar list. And I went to the head of the Hartman Institute, Rabbi Daniel Hartman, and I said, Daniel, we have a problem. There appears to be a serious group of Muslim American leaders who want us to teach them about Judaism in Israel. And Daniel immediately said, well, let's put together a curriculum. So we did, and I sent the curriculum to Abdullah, and he said, this is all wrong. I said, why? He said, Israel and Zionism have to be at the center of this curriculum. Okay. He said, my community has no problem in principle with Judaism as a religion. What Muslims will say is, the Quran tells us to respect Judaism, Christianity. That's not our problem. He said, the problem is we don't understand how Jews understand themselves. What is the meaning of Israel in contemporary Jewish identity? How does peoplehood work in relation to religion? He said, you have to create a curriculum for us that addresses the misunderstandings that are rife in the Muslim world. And so we did. And I could talk about this for the next 4 days, but suffice to say that we have now over 100 people at various stages of the program. We've just begun our 5th cohort. It's never easy, and the results are almost always remarkable. Because our goal in the program is not to get Muslim American leaders to agree with Israeli policy. This requires a certain amount of self-reckoning on our part, a certain amount of restraint. My goal, and I would, if I can speak for you as well, Abdullah, I think it's our goal together, is to get emerging Muslim American leaders to understand, first of all, how Jews understand, how we understand ourselves, and secondly, to come to terms with the legitimacy of Israel. And that, for me, has always been the crucial issue. You can agree or disagree about any Israeli policy, I don't care. I'm ready to agree, I'm ready to argue, and we argue all the time in MLI. But the question of Israel's existence, the question of Israel's indigenousness, the notion of an uprooted people returning to its home, this is the core of what our curriculum has become. And I think that the results are quite extraordinary. I'll just say one last comment, which is that I'm both very proud and very frustrated about the same thing, which is that this is an absolutely unique program. There's nothing like this anywhere in the world, and it makes me very proud, and I feel this enormous sense of responsibility and gratitude to Abdullah for giving me this chance to do what I feel is really sacred work. And at the same time, I'm deeply frustrated by the failure of I would say, of world Jewry and of the state of Israel to place relations with the Muslim world at the center of our agenda, because our relationship with the Muslim world is going to increasingly determine the nature of Jewish life around the world in the 21st century, and we need to really come to terms with it.
Thank you, Yossi. The death threats that you got, and there was a particular episode with a Palestinian activist. And I would like you to just very quickly just say to the audience, say what happened.
Absolutely. There has been an incredible pushback and anger when we made the program public. But before I get there, I would like to add on my brother Yossi's comment. What attracted me to Shalom Hartman Torah in the first place was something that I see how this institution was beautifully articulating the kind of biblical, scriptural, religious Zionism that many Muslims have never heard of. They heard the Zionism and Israel born out of Auschwitz, and they had a problem with accepting it. But they were never able to hear the kind of Zionism and Israel born out of Sinai. There was never a conversation or a religious ticket or religious argument why this is not a Western colonial land grab, why this is a homecoming for the Jewish community. You may or agree or disagree, but that language was simply missing. And that's why I insisted that Hartman is doing this at its best, that you have to absolutely focus on creating a conversation religious Muslims in the religious language can understand and discuss these issues in the religious terminology. And that really helped. That really incredibly helped. As we Muslims say, one of my Dayenu moments in the program was one of the participants after the program. She said, "Abdullah, I hate you." Why? Because before this program, I was such a comfortable. I was saying to myself, I am not anti-Semitic, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm anti-Zionist, I'm anti-Israeli. And that was such a comfortable place to be. I am not a hater. I don't hate people. But after learning how Jews themselves understand what Zionism is, she isn't a Muslim Zionist. None of the program participants ever will be Muslim Zionists per se. But we were able to understand that that's not a category or a distinction or a separation that most Jews, especially the religious ones, are necessarily making. So it was an incredibly important discourse that we were able to break through. And I'm so glad to see that experience of my friend is commonly shared across the board with many participants as well. We made the program public. A week later, the war in Gaza started in 2014. Our God is God of irony. So it can be. So most people, they heard about this program in the context of what's going on in Gaza. And one of the dilemmas and difficulties between our communities is our sources of information on anything, but especially on Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is completely different. You talk and follow a certain set of realities, different tragedies, different bloodshed, and my community sees a different one. So many people regret that one of our dreams with Yossi is to create a media service, Jewish Muslim media service, where we no comment, no midrash, just push-up, putting how one issue is reflected in the Jewish media and how is it reflected in the Muslim media. It's incredible.
Jewish Journal.
Yes. But even in Jewish Journal, you will see it's how incredibly different.
Right. It's a good idea.
How contradictory it can be.
It's a good idea.
And regretfully, that emotional heat, when many Muslims were outraged by the civilian casualties and they were watching and following certain issues happening in 2014 summer, which was my longest summer ever, they heard that a bunch of Muslims are going to Israel to schmooze with the Zionists. And understandably, so much anger, so much hate, including many death threats, FBI, that was the most difficult moment actually. Maybe undeservingly, in the eyes of my children, I am someone day and night trying to work for the Muslim community, lift up the Muslim community. Islam is an essential part of our house. What gets us our bed in the morning is our love to this religion. Everything is centered around improving the life of Muslim community in the United States and responding to the challenges. One morning, multiple FBI cars stormed into our house because they received some legitimate death threats. Anyway, the long story short, it was very difficult to explain that to my children, like why some fellow Muslims would be so angry to a level that they might even consider hurting us. But that kind of anger and knee-jerk reaction has, Baruch Hashem, as we say, Alhamdulillah, has for the most part have faded away. Over the years, we were able to gain the hearts and minds of many, many Muslims. Going back to your conversation, one of my intention doing this Abelai program is to model to modern, young, millennial, religious Jews and Muslims that you have to be loyal to your community. You have to establish your credibility with your community. But you have to also, when you see a collective wisdom of your community is failing, they are putting up certain taboos, certain litmus tests that's plaguing your community, you should purposefully basically fail those litmus tests. You should purposefully challenge your community and show and prove that those litmus tests is not to the benefit of the community, but to the detriment and the harm of the community. I think one of the litmus tests for the Muslim community was Israel is a taboo. Israel is not, you can't speak about this. All the anger and death threats I received, why? Only one reason is I take people to Israel. If I did this program in New York, the world's largest Jewish city, if I did it in here, nobody would have cared. But the fact that we are actually going there, the fact that we are actually spending a whole month within a 13-month fellowship program, and not only saying we are two statists, we believe in the existence and the legitimacy of the state of Israel, but in action we are showing that was the main source of anger, and we survived this backlash within our community. As I say, Baruch Hashem, I think those taboos that that potential community backlash is not as consequential as many people would think. And I'm glad we are no longer keeping certain realities between the Jewish community and the Muslim in the areas we put an influence is no longer the litmus test for us.
But Imam, I want to challenge you in the sense that what do you do when you have a problematic text from the Quran, right? That does have sort of a
bring it on,
suggest anti-Semitism and a certain, the supremacist ideology that we often hear about, that is used as justification for some of the animosity towards Jews and towards Israel. How do you deal with that when your fellow Muslims quote from the Quran to justify animosity against both the Jews and Israel?
Is the question clear? What do you do with those violent calls from the Quran, violent texts from the Quran? You see, Judaism is not what Torah says. Judaism is what Jews do. Christianity is not what Bible says. Christianity is what Christians do. Islam is not only what Quran says, what Muslims do. What I do with those texts, unlike many liberal Jews or liberal Christians, I don't disown those texts. As a believing, practicing Orthodox Muslim, my religion and my tradition is not an open buffet for me. I go and pick what I like and I leave what I don't like. And I find that kind of approach, it's so easy and simplistic for many liberal Muslims to say, oh, I don't deal with this. That's not part of my tradition. I can't say it. I cannot. I have to own it. Even to those evil people taking that text and building a theology of hatred. As much as ISIS, Hezbollah, Hamas, all these evil terrorist organizations doing evil things in the name of Islam, as much as I hate them, as much as they disgust me, I cannot say they are not Muslim. They are part of who I am. They are part of my tradition. They are texting. So this disowning of your own crazies is something that I don't do. What I do is I struggle with those texts and I invite people to two things. If Islam is what Muslims have done, if Islam is what Muslims do, I invite them to extend their memory and history beyond a couple of decades of this conflict and extend it 1400 years of Jewish-Muslim history and what Jews and Muslims have done. It wasn't rosy. It wasn't 21st century egalitarian, positive, equality-centered. It was Muslims here, Jews here. It was hierarchical. But compare their experience to Jews in Europe. Compare their experience to anywhere else in the world. It wasn't that Muslims were innately, inherently more peaceful or less violent than the Christian Europe. But there were certain elements within Islam, within Sharia, the way in which we never allowed these toxic elements, toxic texts, toxic like the Muslim version of Amalek, Muslim version of Haman's story. We never allowed those potentially poisonous source of violence and destructive texts to become a mainstream theology. If the central message of Quran was to kill all the infidels and the Jews, we had every opportunity to do it for 1400 years. There could have been many, many Holocausts. There was Muslim anti-Semitism from day one. There was Muslim anti-Semitism turning to violent episodic in many different parts of the Muslim world. But it was never like a regular pogroms of the West. There is nothing close to Spanish Inquisition or, God forbid, Holocaust. Nothing close to it.
But Imam, let me challenge you on this one too. Because I'm one of those Jews.
I know.
I'm one of those Jews, and I know that one of the reasons why we did not have Holocaust and pogroms was because we accepted our role as second-class citizens, as dhimmis. The Muslims in Morocco never saw us as a threat. But now that the Jews all of a sudden are in this position of real power, we're not second-class citizens in the Middle East anymore. How do you think that changes the picture?
I am not suggesting let's go back to good old days, as some powers from Washington, D.C. these days are suggesting. I am suggesting our relative coexistence should inspire us to do better. We should be able to see each other equal. We should be able to see each other as peers. We should be able to see each other's legitimacy side by side. This is one thing. Second, most of that information is unfortunately inaccurate. Like, you can go to Torah and pick one source, one verse, and say this is Judaism. Look, that's exactly what the first book I read about the Judaism and Jews at the age of 12 was the children's version of the Protocols of Elders of Zion. And they were putting Palestinian casualty pictures and putting the verses of Torah, Joshua's entrance to the Holy Land, or things in that nature. I have been subject to that level of propaganda. It took so much to take that poison out of my system in the later years. That's why I always refer to myself as a recovering anti-Semite, because so early on, that kind of poison and hate entered into my system that my recovery has to be a lifelong struggle. Lifelong struggle. Some of this is a sheer misconception. I'll give you only one example. Like many Jews I meet, they say, oh, in the Quran, God says Jews are children of pigs and monkeys. How many of you heard of this? Like for many Jews, that's the only thing they know. Quran is 6,666 verses. But the actual verse, like every other stereotype and hate, many of the anti-Semitic medieval, it's based on a partial truth. If you go to the chapter and verse, Quran is talking about the previous community because they violated the Sabbath. When I actually present the actual Quranic verse, when the Quran is talking about a specific community, because they are of violation of the halakha, more specifically Shabbat regulations, God cursed them and turned them into pigs and monkeys. It's not a categorical Jews are children of pigs and monkeys, but in a way, very specific criticism. I will never forget one of the Chabad rabbis that I showed the verse. He said, I can relate to this. I can relate to the spirit of this. Why God is angry that Jews are not observing Shabbat in that particular part of the world. So there's a lot more context that I'm trying to say to all these rumors and out of context Quranic verses that you have been hearing.
Yossi, when I heard you speak at a mosque a few years ago, you said when you have a really deep problem, you have to bring something really deep to try to have any chance for a solution. And you brought up God. And it was in the context of recognizing the reality of how deep our divisions are with the Muslims. Because no matter what my friend the Imam says, the reality is that you might interpret it within context. But unfortunately, there are too many Muslims out there who don't interpret it the way you do.
He said too many Muslims.
There are, and so you were saying it's what they do that counts.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we see too much of that. And Yossi said something in a mosque in downtown LA, that when you have such deep, deep divisions, you got to bring something deep, including God. Now, I know that you're focusing on Zionism and Israel, but is God in the picture?
I think that one of the reasons why the project works is because it's a meeting point between people who take God seriously. And it's extraordinary to see the quality, the spiritual quality of these young Muslim American leaders who on the one hand are graduates of the leading American universities, are so completely American. I remember the first cohort on the first day they came and we didn't know what to expect. And they show up and they're calling each other dude, and Abdullah's nickname is Gandalf. And so they're just so immersed in popular American culture on the one hand, and on the other hand, these are really frum Muslims, and they're really taking their Islam seriously. And so much of my interaction personally with our cohorts is trying to explain to them why I live in Israel and what it means to me to be a religious Jew living in Jerusalem, and how that is a fulfillment of my spirituality, of my Judaism, And I spoke not long ago in a mosque in Boca Raton. I'd forgotten that we were together at in the LA mosque. That was the first mosque that I spoke in. That was Jihad Turk's mosque, and it was here in LA. A couple of months ago, I spoke at a mosque in Boca Raton. Believe it or not, there are Muslims in Boca Raton, not only Jews. And one of the interesting things for me, by the way, is that this program has opened up, is when I come to America on a lecture tour, I now have two communities that I speak to. I speak to American Jews, and I also speak to American Muslims, because we have graduates now of this program all over the country, and I'm getting invitations to speak in mosques. I spoke in a Turkish mosque last week in Houston. But anyway, so when I was in this mosque in Boca, the head of the mosque came over to me before I spoke, and he said, don't speak about politics, which means don't speak about Israel. I said, okay, what would you like me to speak about? And he said, speak about local issues. And I'm thinking like zoning laws, I mean, what? So I spoke about our project, and then I turned to the people in the room, many of whom were Palestinian Americans and Syrian Americans. It was a heavily Arab mosque. And I asked them, when you all speak about justice for the Palestinians, is that a political issue or is that a religious issue for you? Does it come out of your sense of Islam and justice? And everyone around the room vigorously nodded, yes, it is a religious issue. And I said, for me, when I speak about Israel, it's not a political issue. That is who I am as a religious Jew. It is my being. It is the essence of my story, my faith. And one of the women there, who was the principal of the day school attached to the mosque, a Palestinian woman with whom I had had a bit of a testy encounter before speaking, came up to me afterwards and said, can you come back and help us navigate that conversation? And I think that that is really how MLI works, is that we approach these issues from a different perspective. Last week, when I spoke in this Turkish mosque in Houston, there were a number of Jews who came to participate. And when I finished speaking, one of them began talking about Jewish grievances against the Muslim world, against the Palestinians. And I was listening and thinking, that's exactly where we don't go. Because that leads to only one place, which is the counter-argument. And I know, after 5 years of this work, I know all the arguments by heart. I can debate myself as a Muslim versus a Jew for hours. And if we want to vent and we want to feel good about being loyal to the integrity of our position, then that's one approach. Our approach is to speak about who we are rather than about who the other is. And I think that that's really the way in which to begin the relationship. And that's what I've learned. That's what I've learned from my brother Abdullah. That's what I've learned from this extraordinary work of wrenching, and none of it is easy. Really, I can't emphasize that more strongly. This work requires enormous patience, restraint, and at the same time, being faithful to yourself. Never compromising with who you are and what you believe, and making space for the other side.
Speaking of difficult, I want to,
Speaking about ourselves and allowing to be as self-critical as possible. That's what Shalom Hartman's program for us as participants has absolute credibility and integrity. Because this is not a Hasbara program. It's not Judaism and Zionism 101 to Muslims only. They invite us to their most personal and very difficult conversations. They unveil their moral dilemmas. They talk about from a large spectrum of Jewish struggles vis-a-vis what's going on in the Middle East and around the world as well. We have to develop these absolutely honest and self-critical conversations vis-a-vis one another. The beautiful thing that Daniel Hartman always say, and that's my favorite moment in any Jewish worship service, I never miss Yom Kippur for two main reasons. One, it's so fun to see these Jews fasting only once a year and complaining. Whereas I do it for a whole month. And then secondly, I love this. Judaism and Islam in its own way says, do this, don't do this. You don't go and say, that's your problem, that's your sin, that's your shortcoming and mistake. We have to develop this critical language, and we have to be confident enough to allow each other to come and witness those private conversations.
Are you saying that there is, that the Jews at Hartman do self-criticism as part of the program, and do the Muslims do self-criticism? The reason I ask is because I know that, I mean, from the little I learned in psychology, sometimes resentments are so deep that knowledge alone doesn't really eradicate the resentment, because a resentment is a very emotional thing. It's not rational. And I'm curious, in addition to all the success stories you've both shared with us, because I'm going to play journalist, I'd like to know if there's some failures.
Yeah, but I just would like to first address the whole question of self-criticism, because I think that needs some unpacking. What Daniel and I tell each cohort on its first day is that our commitment to you, our reciprocal gesture to you in response to your courage in coming here, in response to the trust that you're showing in us, is that we are going to treat you as insiders to our Jewish conversation. We are going to treat you like any Jewish group that comes to our doors, and we're going to share with you our struggles with our own texts, our struggles with faith, our struggles with Israeli society, with the direction of Israeli society. We're going to lay this out for you. And we have on our staff a very wide range of people from across the political, religious spectrum. And I tend to be more hawkish, and I remember this conversation with you, Abdullah, one of our first. When Abdullah came to me and said, I'd like you to be my partner in the program, I said, are you sure that I'm the right partner for you? Because I'm a hawkish Israeli. Why don't you find a left-winger? And he said, I don't remember exactly what you said. Something along the lines of, I don't want a parv Jew.
I said, I have so many of those tikkun olam Jews already.
Right. And it's not, this idea of criticism, it's not, when you say criticism in an American Jewish context, it has a certain implication. We're talking about something very different. We're talking about admitting Muslims, which is not easy to admit outsiders, and especially Muslims, with whom we are in an adversarial relationship, to admit Muslims, one group after another, into our family conversation. But that's precisely what makes the program work, because there is this sense of trust. And then what we find is that when they see that we're lowering our guard, they lower their guard as well. And what we hear over and over again from participants is a sense of almost shame, I would say, that why in the Muslim world isn't there an institution like Hartman that we can invite Jews into to study Islam from a critical perspective?
I once read an article saying that one of the best things that Israel could export to the Middle East is self-criticism. And I wonder if this kind of an initiative, do you see it leading to public self-criticism in the Muslim community? Because I know it's not part of the culture, and it's definitely part of the Jewish culture, and God knows all you got to do is read one issue of the Jewish Journal, and you'll see how we seem to thrive on self-criticism. Is that something that you see? Is that one of your goals? Is that one of your missions?
I don't think you're absolutely right to take pride in that kind of rich, self-critical culture. But I don't think that's innately Jewish or innately Muslims are lacking. To me, self-criticism comes from deep sense of confidence. It is a sign of civilizational health. If a society is spiritually, culturally, politically, economically thriving, like one of its outcomes is they are confident enough, they are ethical, moral enough to basically criticize. For many of the devastating pictures and news that you are hearing from the Muslim world, it's because Muslim majority world, there is no one Muslim world, but Muslim majority societies, they are experiencing some sort of a dark age today. Civilizational health and strength is not there. And when civilizations collapse the way in which Muslim majority civilizations have collapsed, it's not only their stock market collapse, it's only their roads and cars and economical or physical infrastructure collapse. The real devastation in the civilizational decline is the soft power. In the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th century of Islam and Islamic intellectual world, if you look the amount of self-criticism, the amount of debates, the amount of Talmudic, Rabbi Hillel, Rabbi Shammah conversations that's going on was incredible. People were ripping up and criticizing themselves in such a dynamic way. But what the unimpressive lack of self-critical culture is a sign of absolute unhealthy condition of the Muslim majority world. And yes, Israel and Jewish society can be a light to of many nations in this aspect. You can model.
You said.
Can I just jump in here for a moment? Because I think that MLI presents a challenge to the American Jewish community. And that is that we have now graduated or are in the process of graduating dozens and dozens of front-rank Muslim Americans, people who really are in the process of becoming the leaders of the American Muslim community. And these are people who have invested a year of their time in deeply immersing in Judaism, in Israel, and Jewish identity. And defensiveness is not the ground for a spiritual renaissance. The potential of an Americanized Islam that is both deeply traditional on the one hand and open to modernity and to democratic ideas on the other, is really, I think, what led you to initiate this program. And so our challenge is, will we as a community reciprocate? What will we do with the now 100 plus MLIers, who, God willing, in another 2, 3, 4 years will be 200? We're already talking about a critical mass of leading Muslim Americans. How will the American Jewish community respond to the challenge of deep conversation with people who know us, in some cases as well as we know ourselves?
I want to add only one layer to that challenge. If you put overwhelming majority of the American Muslims into a Jewish map, overwhelming majority of American Muslims, they are between modern Orthodoxy and the traditional conservative Judaism. And the initial tendency, that's why I was particularly happy to be invited by a shul like this, because modern Orthodox Judaism or more traditional and conservative Judaism, who are in the business of continuity and change, who are in the deep sense of responsibility to make sure they will pass on the younger generation the kind of tradition that they have inherited from their parents, that struggle is so real to us. For many non-Muslim, average American, you might think Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hate is our number one issue. What keeps many Muslim fathers and mothers awake in the night is, will my daughter and son fall in love with a Muslim girl or Muslim boy? Will he keep a halal house? Will she raise Muslim children? That's our struggle in America. And I will give you only one example. Despite many taboos, despite many anti-Zionist, even anti-Semitic sentiments, everybody knows here the Pew result on American Jews, right? The day after Pew made that study public, the day after, 9 voice messages from all around the United States, Muslim communities, calling and basically saying, Imam Abdullah, you seem to know something about Jews and Judaism. Come and tell us, how can we achieve what Jews achieved without paying the same price? Because that level of assimilation, that percentage of interfaith marriage, that percentage of not being able to keep people within the bounds of the community horrified them. From where they look, they don't want to end up that large scale of assimilation. The melting pot of America is taking away and eroding the kind of tradition that they would like to keep as they want to engage with modern American values and secular democracy, etc. And regretfully and tragically, people who we can have that conversation the most fruitfully in the Jewish community are not the ones we see and naturally have a relationship with. And I hope, inshallah, through MLI and through many other programs, that these naturally partnered parts of the Jewish community and the Muslim community can be in easy conversations with.
So, Imam, Yossi talked about creating a sort of Americanized Islam, right? And you were talking about that golden era, maybe, you know, many centuries ago, when there was a lot of self-reflection in Islam, almost a Talmudic approach. And it seems to me what I'm hearing is that Islam is sort of due for this kind of a journey right now, right? So I'm curious, like, why can't Islam do that without the Jews? I mean, why is it that the Jews always have to be in the picture? It seems to me that that's a process that can happen independently of us, because we do it. No, we love you. But the Jews go through this process independent of any relationship we have with other people. So I'm just curious, like, why is it that it can't be done just on its own?
2 reasons. One, with the existing level of anti-Semitism in the Muslim communities, we will never be as American as apple pie. This society, especially after Holocaust, moved to a level where they will not tolerate that DNA. So long as the Muslim community cannot come to terms with its own demons, if we cannot see Judaism, Zionism, and Israel in a different light, we will never be mainstream in America. That's very important for me. And that's why MLI is not doing anybody a favor, but to myself. We have to understand why this is a major obstacle and litmus test for us. Secondly, what's wrong with tapping into an experience and learning from the successes and failures of the Jewish community? I think and what is more beautiful than the Jewish community looking back to a recent immigrant community which resembles them 40, 50 years ago and extending a help that we don't have to go through the kind of challenges and dilemmas and we can do a better job. I think that will make Hashem smile. That will absolutely be the kind of gift that in the 21st century Jews and Muslims, and American Jews and American Muslims, can present to our God.
Right. That was an easy one. So we're almost ready for the speeches. So did you gather the questions from the audience? We got some really smart people in the audience, so I'm looking forward to hearing them. Not the success stories, the instances you had where things did not work, where you might have had a cohort or an individual that it just didn't work, and they came back to America and the resentments were still there. Does that happen?
Oh, yeah.
It has?
You want to list a few of those?
Well, we had a Palestinian participant in the program who called me one evening and said that he had noted that the BDS movement had just labeled our project a collaborationist effort with the occupation. And this MLI participant said to me, for me as a Palestinian, that's a literal death sentence. And I can't stay in the program, and I understood that. He subsequently went public against MLI, and in something that was really reminiscent of the culture of the Stalinist show trials, he publicly denounced MLI and said he had been duped by us, and it was an unfortunate way of exiting the program. So of course we've had our failures. We are constantly reassessing the curriculum, thinking about where are we taking this program, and so for example, we're going to be doing a full day on Mizrahi Israel, which we've tried to do in the past, and for various reasons it has not been successful. And the message that I feel is very important to convey to MLIers is that Israel is not a European country. Quite the opposite. A majority of Israeli Jews actually come from the Middle East and have moved from one part of the Middle East to the other. And that's very important to help not only MLIers, but to help the Muslim world understand who we are as a people.
Imam, speaking of the success stories, would you get one of these Muslim scholars who've been through the program to write an article in the Jewish Journal on how they see Israel differently now?
Absolutely.
Would they? Is there a fear of going public?
Many, absolutely.
Many
are going public, and
right.
Many would be more than happy to write articles. There are two in the audience that I would like to actually recognize. Maryam and Suraya. Is she here still? Suraya, could you please just stand up? These are two of our best. You should absolutely get to know them. They are incredible, beautiful souls, and they are from the Los Angeles area. We have about 11 graduates. Yes, that's a low-hanging fruit.
So they don't take a risk by going public?
If their income is not coming from the Muslim community, if they are independent individuals and if they choose to be public, we don't decide. Every participant decides themselves.
Because a lot of times, you know, we'll do a story in the Jewish Journal on this imam in Riverside or whatever in a mosque, and he says horrible things about killing the Jews and so forth, and it's always the Jews criticizing. And you know, it would be nice once in a while if we can get a Muslim voice doing the criticism.
And it's important, it's a moral responsibility that we cannot even shy away. Every talk I give, the first question is, where are the moderate Muslims? I think part of the success of MLI, if you know that these people are going and spending 13 months, spending a month in Israel, it's so difficult to ask that person, where are the moderate Muslims? Right? Because there they are, Hineni, here I am. And basically investing so much of our time and energy in reaching out and building those bridges. I hope you will utilize the kind of depth and richness that Maryam and Suraya and many others in this area are bringing.
So look, a couple months ago there was this incident, was it here in California, of an imam who called for killing Jews. A petition was circulated within the Muslim community, initiated by MLIers, to get him fired. Now, I don't know if that made the news or not, and this is part of the problem when you're dealing with an immigrant and post-immigrant community that's fairly insular, and that should be familiar to us from our experience initially in this country, that there isn't always an easy link between what happens internally in one's community and what's recognized by the society. Because here you had an example of a petition that was signed, I think, by several hundred people, thousands of people. And it was initiated by, I think it was Rabia and a few other MLIers. And Mariam, you were involved in that?
I think we need MLI to be more mainstream, because, you know, the impression we get is that the dominant sort of mainstream Muslim organizations like CARE and so forth, there's a feeling that they just defend the brand. So they do a quick condemnation, but the real mission is to defend the brand of Islam, and the things you hear from them was you can't paint Islam with one brush, and this is a hijacking of Islam, and this doesn't represent who we are. So that is sort of the dominant messaging that we get.
One of the jokes among MLIers is, oh, he's in Islam as a religion of peace guy. And this notion of being apologetic and defensive is antithetical to the MLI culture. And the more American Islam becomes, the less defensive it becomes. And again, that's an experience that the Jewish community has gone through. So the more you are comfortable in the mainstream, the more you're able to express yourself. And what we see in MLI is the beginnings of a culture that's very different from the organizations that represent the Muslim community today. You mentioned CARE and others. And we're really seeing, I think, the beginnings of a new Muslim American community.
As you are sifting through the questions, David.
We're going to be here until candle lighting?
Yes. One of the devastating results and consequences of our so depressive state of affairs as Jews and Muslims, no one should kid each other that things are not really well. Organized Jewish community and the organized Muslim community, one of the elements that we hope these graduates of MLI and others will enable mainstream Jewish leaders, more or less pro-Israeli and Zionist, will be speaking to mainstream American Muslim community leaders who have standing and credibility in their own community. And by and large, they may have very critical views of Israel. They may label themselves as pro-Palestinian. But unless these mainstream communities do not communicate, if there is no relationship, if there is no interaction, then what ends up happening? My community relies on kind of Jews who are validating the existing prejudice, bias, and hate. And the mainstream Jewish organizations and many synagogues are relying on those so-called Muslims or even ex-Muslims who are happy to go around in the Jewish spaces, make a lot of money, and to kind of validate the already existing monstrous, scary image of Islam and Muslims. We have to break this vicious cycle, inshallah. Be'ezrat Hashem.
Okay, Imam. How receptive are your Muslim students at Duke to the idea of engaging with Jewish students, especially regarding Israel?
It's very difficult to make any broad generalizations. But I think the real test of whatever we are talking here tonight, our fault lines are in the younger generations. Our fault lines are very important critical battles as American Jews and American Muslims will be on college campuses. Unfortunately, increasing partisanship and increasing, to me, very troubling tendencies of the Jewish and Muslim community leadership, seeing these college kids as proxy soldiers, foot soldiers for a proxy war, we are doing such a huge disservice by giving talking points to their hands and forcing them to parrot and repeat the talking points that they themselves have not digested. And a lot of people are losing sleep over what's going on between BDS and the kind of tension. But I really lose sleep because of our inaccurate reaction, our sense of partisanship, throwing money, which is making things worse. Not only these conflicts, but more and more Jewish and Muslim students are checking out. They are so discouraged by their community leadership that they don't want to be part of a partisan proxy war. They want to have a conversation, but the organized communities are forcing people to politicize the situation and not giving, not modeling, not exemplifying what would a Jewish-Muslim conversation without political tension and partisanship, how can a pro-Israeli Zionist Jewish student can have a conversation with pro-Palestinian Muslim student? There are not many models and products out there, unfortunately. And therefore we are losing more people not through the partisanship or anti-Semitism, but apathy. more Jews and Muslim students are checking out.
Now,
In places like Duke, Princeton, Yale, where we have a full-time Muslim chaplain, where we have above the student level representation, adult representation, I think you see really incredibly beautiful models of engagement. In most other colleges, you have Hilal with 20 staff, and you have Muslim Student Association, a bunch of 17 years old and 18-year-old trying to figure out their lives. There is no equality, there is no conversation. So Muslim community have to basically put up their acts together, own their campus communities, and provide similar representation and resources. Only then you will see more balanced conversations.
So if I can just jump in for a moment, this is one of the many issues that you and I disagree about. And that is, I think that Jewish students on campus need to be equipped to do two things. One is to defend Israel, and if that means talking points, then it's talking points. And the other is to be open to a new kind of conversation with Muslim students, and to try to navigate that dual responsibility is very difficult. It's putting a lot on the shoulders of young people, but given the atmosphere on campuses today, I don't think that Jewish students have a choice.
here's an interesting one. To American Muslims leadership, especially the new leadership that you're creating, what kind of an influence do you have on the Muslim leadership in Israel and throughout the Middle East, including the Palestinian territories?
Very little. Very, very little. Very limited. Just to explain the breakdown of the American Muslim communities on one foot, we are about 4 million people living in the United States. 1/3 of us are African American Muslims. And these African American Muslim community came 400, 500 years ago, and this country was built on the sweat and the blood of these people who were brought here as slaves. And about the remaining 2/3 are people who came to this country after 1965, like myself. Most of us came here as a graduate students in early 1960s and 70s and 80s, and now the second and third generation is emerging. Of that post-1965 Muslims, about almost half of us are from South Asia, from Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, Bangladesh, from South Asia. And about 20% from Middle East and North Africa, and the rest is everybody else, like myself, Turkish American. So we come from a wide ethnic, racial background, and people who are coming specifically from the Middle East or from Palestine and having an ability to influence is very, very limited.
So if we accomplish our dream of creating an Americanized Islam that's more moderate, more self-critical, the chances that it may influence the Islam around the world are...
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Of course. This country, it is much more difficult to defend it as a shining city on the hilltop. Not only the Muslim world, we are, I think, as a nation, as Americans, we are striving to be an exemplary model, multicultural, multi-religious, multi-civilizational country. And within that, if healthy American society, our civil liberties and our civic society reveals the best of Islam, of course it will influence in a positive way the Muslim world.
It's a good segue to this question, Yossi. Is there any plans to expand the MLI to include Europeans and other areas? Not that you need more work on your plate.
Yeah, well, last year, I think it was last winter, we had a group of British Muslim leaders who came to eavesdrop on one of the cohorts, and we're looking into establishing the MLI model in Europe. And I think that we are going to move forward. They have a slightly different model in mind than our model. They want to have a program that brings together Muslim and Jewish leaders. They have very different needs, very different dynamics. In Europe, especially in England, France, elsewhere, you have a much larger Muslim community and a much smaller Jewish community. And so here the dynamic is to some extent reversed. And for various other reasons, they're looking at a slightly different model, but we're definitely ready and willing to export this model to any community around the world that's interested in picking it up.
Abdullah, will there ever be Muslim Zionists?
There are a few. Again, I think that effort of producing Muslim Zionists is, to me, a dead end. It will make more harm than good. I think one of the general obstacle and disease of the 21st century is increasingly everybody is looking for recruits and members. There is an increasing culture of silos that people only talk to that people that they agree with. People only talk to you if politically, socially, culturally, ethically, morally, you're 100% on the same page with each other. You only make peace with your enemies. You don't make peace with your friends. You build bridges between people whom you have distance with. If people bring and become Muslim Zionists, if there are those Muslim Zionists, a handful that I know, your relationship with them, your investment in them will destroy your ability to have a conversation with credible mainstream Muslim communities. Not only, I hope there will not be many Muslim Zionists, I hope there will be friends of Israel, there will be friends of Zionists, there will be people who will understand, like myself, where these people are coming from. But members and the disciples is not the way to go. But critical friends, ethical, moral friends, who will stand, be a character witness with you when a hate is said against you, is exactly what you need to look for.
Will there be like A Street, like J Street? You know, will there be like Arab Voices for Peace and Breaking the Silence and J Street, the ones that we have here that beat us up constantly? Will there be those groups in the Muslim community in America as part of this Americanized Islam?
Absolutely.
Do you see that happening?
It's already happened. Whatever America did to Jews and Judaism will do to us. It's inevitable. We just want to learn that we can negotiate this slightly better.
All right, when they launch A Street, call me, because that's going on the cover. Yossi, did you want to add?
Yeah, I think the expectation of Zionist Muslims is misplaced. I am for a two-state solution, but I'm for a two-state solution very reluctantly. I don't want a two-state solution. I don't want to give up Judea and Samaria, which I believe belongs to me. I feel that given the reality, I have no choice. There's another people there, there's a counterclaim. I want to preserve Israel as a Jewish majority in democratic society, and so I have to give up something that I believe deeply belongs to me. And that's a very different dynamic. And so what I'm looking for on the other side are partners in that reluctant rapprochement. And I'm not looking for passionate supporters of Zionism among Muslims. Over the course of the last 100 years, we've been in a 100-year existential war. And both sides have caused enormous pain and damage to the other without getting into the argument of who started. I'm on the Zionist side of that argument. But it doesn't matter for this particular argument. And the argument is that each side has deeply wounded the other. And so when you have Israelis like myself who say we're for a two-state solution, we're not passionately for a two-state. I'm not J Street. I'm not beating my breast and saying that a two-state solution is my ideal. It's not my ideal. It's my fallback position. And so I'm looking for partners on the Muslim side who have a similar ambivalence. And in that mutual ambivalence, we can really begin to have a serious conversation.
Also, since we are talking about Muslim Zionists, allow me to take a few cheap shots at Christian Zionists. And I cannot tell you how troubling it comes across. Certain segments of the Jewish society is troubling, to me, deep troubling relationship with some elements within the Christian Zionist communities. This summer I was in Ariel. I visited Ariel University. How many of you have been to Ariel in the West Bank? Like one of the biggest buildings in the city of Ariel is the John Hagee Stadium. Have you ever seen it? And you go and talk to these Christian Zionists, and you just basically don't know, you are speechless. Like what an average God-fearing, faithful Jew, halakha observing Jew would have anything common with these people, with that kind of theology, with that kind of enmity towards Islam and Muslims. My experience with the world of human history is my enemy's enemy is my friend, works to a certain extent. And sometimes those kind of unholy alliances only erode your moral framework. That kind of turning a blind eye on very weird, wacko theology which hopes to kill many Jews at the end of the day, but in the meantime providing some support to you. I cannot tell you how ethically, morally questionable and troubling for many people, including myself.
Well, you know, they're going to love us and support us until Jesus comes back, so we're good for now. So that's sort of how we look at it. But I want
to... Did you hear what you said?
The unconditional love that Christians have for Israel is not something that we easily dismiss just because we're so desperate for friends. But I understand your point too. I do.
Desperation should not let us give up our morals and ethics.
So, I'm going to combine two questions, Yossi. How can educating American Muslims about Israel and Zionism impact the specific points of conflict, like checkpoints and settlements between Palestinians and Israelis? And then the second one ties into it. Any plans to include Israeli Muslims in the initiative?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. As a result of MLI, the Hartman Institute began a process of soul searching, asking itself, why are we engaged in education of American Muslims thousands of miles away when we're really not engaged with the Palestinian Arab Israeli society, never mind the Palestinians on the other side of the Green Line. And so we've begun various initiatives at the Institute. We have a program for Jewish and Arab high school principals where they sit and study together, a program that's growing. There are dozens of principals that are involved. We've set up a very serious seminar of leading Arab Israeli intellectuals and Israeli Jewish intellectuals to try to conceive together how Israel as a Jewish and democratic state can work better for the Arab minority and what that means. So that's one piece of it. So I wouldn't say that we are directly applying the model of MLI to Israeli reality, but as a consequence of MLI, certainly the culture at the Hartman Institute has changed. And we now have our relations with the Arab-Israeli community very much at the center of how we see our mission. In terms of the questions of checkpoints, and that's a loaded question, and there's no way to answer that question in a way that I think would be satisfying to the person who raised the question. We're not looking to leverage MLI into a political movement. That's not at all our purpose. MLI is an educational project. What people do with MLI is up to them. In terms of the conflict on the ground, it's a conflict that's defined not only by checkpoints at a wall, but by terrorism and by rejection of Israel's right to exist. And so there are multiple levels to this conflict, and that the conflict is way bigger than our capacity to change it. and whatever impact we can have on attitudes, first of all, in the American Muslim and American Jewish community. That's our primary area. And I say this as an Israeli, as someone who didn't think, I never thought that this would be my work. I left the United States 35 years ago as an immigrant to Israel. And my work in terms of the society that I'm committed to being part of, to trying to help affect, is the society in which I live. But when Abdullah and his friends knocked on my door, I had no choice but to open that door and become partners in a project that's really intended for you more than it is for me.
And I cannot emphasize this enough for all participants. I think I can speak only this point for all of them. Otherwise, I'm only representing myself. For all the participants, MLI is not to solve Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That's a difficult and tall task. Many giants and superpowers have been trying, and it's not maybe going well or not going well, depending on where you're looking for. But for all of us, our job is here in North America. Our job is to see if North American Jews and North American Muslims, we can do better. If we can hold on to our loyalties and attachments and yet go about our American identity, can it create an overarching reality where we can actually model and exemplify, instead of importing depressed polarization and despair from the Middle East, even if we cannot export solution and hope, but we can do better here, and maybe in the long term it can make an impact. But I think, as Yossi said, our very presence make our Israeli partners and teachers understand certain realities on the ground differently. I will never forget, when we were putting together the first cohort of the program, I told the team at Hartman, like, this is a religious group, we pray 5 times a day, like the way you pray 3 times a day. Make sure the Muslim prayer times are reflected in the program, and all the breaks are according to Muslim prayer times. And then the next day, I received a call in Durham, North Carolina, at Duke University, from somebody from Hartman saying, what are the Muslim prayer times in Jerusalem? I said, are you serious? Like, really, you're asking this question to somebody who's living in the United States? Open your office window, don't you see Aqsa? Like, you should be able to ask your Muslim friend. I mean, it's so interesting how the level of polarization and lack of interaction is to a certain level. I think for many people, our very presence forces them to look into Islam, Muslims, where the Middle East in general, to a much deeper, much more complicated level.
Well, this is an interesting one. Dear Imam, can you be cloned? Any doctors in the house?
I hope not. But I hope, and I have all the confidence in the world. The second and third generation American Muslims are much better versions of me. Not only there shouldn't be a replica, because that would be so mediocre to get the same thick Turkish accent, overweight imams like me, but the second
we'll take
and the third,
1 million like you, guaranteed.
Second and
Trust
third,
me.
you can even go higher and shoot higher.
And Hartman, please, do you want to say final words?
Thank you so much first to David Suissa for expertly I want to thank Yossi and Abdullah, my colleagues, for coming here to Los Angeles to share with all of you a really important program that we have at the Shalom Hartman Institute. I want to thank you for being here tonight. I know most have to be here tonight. It's still going on.
You are the real faith.
It's not over yet. There's still more to see at home. Thank you so much to Beth Jacob, to Rabbi Top, to Robin Lewis, to Jess Dolgan, the entire board of Beth Jacob. I'm grateful for holding this event here. This is one of my homes, and I think it's a very important place to hold this. Thank you so much for being my partner on this.